Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, Neil Gibb, and today I've got someone joining me from the Gold Coast who is from National Shelter. We're going to talk about all things affordable housing. It's Emma Greenhalgh from National Shelter. Emma, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming on. National Shelter, it's a peak body. And every time I read peak body, I always think to myself, what is a peak body? What does peak body actually mean?
Yeah. So I'll just even give you a little bit of a background to National Shelter. So we're going into our 50th year next year. So we're established in 1975 by a group of housing activists that were looking nationally about having a national sort of policy body. But some of that also came out of some activism, particularly in places like Sydney, where there was going to be gentrification and renewal at the cost of low cost, private housing and the dislocation of community. So for 50 years, our work has been about policy and advocating to federal governments with a focus on low income households and their housing interests across all tenures. But I guess in terms of what a peak body does, really, organisations in the sector that we're in and individuals don't necessarily engage directly with government. So what we can do is sort of bring together a sector view and engage with government on their programs and policies and provide that sort of united sector voice. Yeah. So then what that means is government then doesn't have to always go out to be engaging with individual organisations. So last week I was in Canberra and engaging with a range of parliamentarians on the upcoming federal election, which is due between now and May. Yep. But also engaging with government about, for example, the build to rent provisions in the legislation and some specific amendments on those.
Yes, cool. And how is National Shelter not accepted, but how is it considered from government? Are they happy to work with you guys? Do they see you as a problem? Do they see you as a solution?
Look, generally really well accepted and respected. We have a good relationship with people in the Minister's office. We have a good relationship with crossbenchers and independents and the Greens. So, we work across the whole Parliament. Doesn't always mean you get to see people when you want to see them, but that's just the nature of how busy politics, is at the moment. But I would say that we are generally well respected. We're not funded by government at the moment. So in our sort of history, we've been funded and defunded by government, and we're working really hard to get refunded by government. But I would say broadly, work well with a whole range of parliamentarians, and we've always had a respectful working relationship.
Cool. So how are you funded currently then, if you're not funded by government?
So we're actually a member-based organisation. Okay. So that ranges from community housing providers to sort of the large faith, multi-service organisations, homelessness services. And then there's also state and territory shelters. So we're a federated body, and they also provide a proportion of their funding as well.
Yeah, great. So how did Emma become the CEO of National Shelter? What was the journey for you to end up in the position that you're in now, and why are you so passionate about working with National Shelter?
Well, I've always been passionate about housing. So 25 years in the housing and homelessness sector. That started off in research, and then I've worked across local governments, so Brisbane City, Gold Coast, in the Department of Housing, private sector. I worked for Q Shelter for a period. And I think it just comes from, it sounds like a cliche to say it comes from a place of social justice. But the other thing is that my background's in planning. in town planning,
Mm-hmm.
a strong interest in sort of human geography. And when I was doing my planning degree, I realized I didn't actually want to work as a planner, um, doing DAs and that sort of stuff. And somehow, I don't know, just sort of gravitated into housing. And then when this job came up, I wasn't originally going to apply for it, and I did. And was quite lucky. But in also sort of, I'm actually finishing up in a couple of weeks with National Shelter.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, I've taken the decision to sort of step back and go to a role that's much closer to home. That's delivering a homelessness response for a local government here in southeast Queensland. So there's a few reasons for that, including some family reasons. But I would just say, in terms of like this role for National Shelter's just been, busy, challenging, exciting, a joy. To be able to engage nationally and, help, I guess, influence the national housing debate has been, sort of, I wouldn't say it's been a dream of mine, but it's been a lot of fun, and, presented, quite a few challenges, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, ticks a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Affordable housing has been on everybody's lips for a long time now. Over in Western Australia, we've got the Honourable John Carey talking about spending something like $2 billion on social housing, which is good, but then they're forgetting about that affordable housing bracket as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how is National Shelter helping not just government, but other developers understand and deliver affordable housing? And what is affordable housing nowadays? Because nothing seems affordable, does it?
Look, I think that is the biggest sort of can of worms, to open up when you start talking about what's affordable housing, because everyone has such a different view. It's the stuff of nightmares. States and territories can't agree, on how they define affordable housing. So my sort of view around affordable housing comes from, I guess, a bit of a program sort of approach where it could be a discount to market rent, but ideally it does have an income threshold as well. So it's not then an affordable housing, for someone who's on a high income or a moderate income. That sort of differs, I guess, depending on, who's providing the funding and the level of subsidy that, they want to provide. I mean, affordable housing does have a role. We do have a preference, I guess, around social housing, but, as you would know, the housing crisis is just going up the income scale.
Mm.
So people are either paying too much in their private rental and not able to access home purchase. They're not eligible for social housing. So we're seeing, I guess, what's been considered to be affordable housing. It's almost, becoming sort of like a larger section, because we're considering, well, affordable housing for people who might be on a low income, but they're either not eligible for social housing or not able to access it. But, we're also seeing, waged households that are sort of in the low to moderate that can't access, private rental or purchase. So we're having to have something that is more affordable, to them. So it really then means, so from our perspective, so for example, there's things like the Housing Australia Future Fund, which has both, social and affordable housing. We would have liked to have seen affordable housing clearly defined in the legislation, to which it's not. But the other aspect of affordable housing, that we've been working, say, with government on, for example, is providing amendments to the build to rent legislation to really sort of tighten up what affordable housing means in build to rent. So it's not just discount to market rent, but it is also no more than 30% of income. So we need both. We need public and social and affordable housing, but it's not that I would say it's messy, but I think sometimes we have to be really clear about maybe not what the definition of affordable housing is, but who it is that we're trying to house, and then work back from that.
Yeah, that was literally going to be my next question. So, what is the demographic of people that need affordable housing now? Because I feel like it's changed a lot. over the last 3 or 4 years, specifically in Perth anyway. But I'd like your view on not just Perth, but across the country as well.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think when we previously had affordable housing, it was still sort of, down the income scale. But when we see what's gone on, absolutely in the last, sort of 5 years and the housing crisis, we're looking at moderate income households that can't afford to rent privately or purchase. So, it is whether, I don't know, to use that sort of key worker kind of term of, health workers and emergency services, etc., but also a bit further, back down the income scale of, sort of cleaners and other sort of maybe lower waged households. So we are sort of looking at a bit more of a spectrum of waged households who need affordable housing. And then I guess if we then think about, well, who it is we need to be housing, then we work back in terms of, well, what is the level of subsidy we're going to have to look at to be housing those people?
Yeah. I'm glad you referred to them as well, because I read the Anglicare Australia Essential Workers Report, which essentially mentioned the same demographic of people that you said there, everyone from cleaners to nurses to fire people, firemen, firewomen, you name it. They were on that list, people that are just good, hard workers that this country needs, but they're struggling to find housing. And I think on the day that that report was released, there was only 6 rentals that were available in the rental market that were affordable, falling in that 30% of gross wage bracket in Western Australia.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about social and affordable housing as well, affordable housing can come in 2 different brackets, can it? It can come government funded through community housing providers, and then it can come private as well. What does it need to be affordable?
Look, for me, it really has to be about the no more than 30% of income.
Yeah.
So yes, we have the discount to market rent definition, but if we only include that, then, you're looking at probably rents that are not affordable for the moderate to low income. So you do still need to include, some sort of income threshold in that. So, it means that lower or moderate wage workers are not in housing stress while they're paying their rent.
You mentioned build to rent quite a few times there as well, as National Shelter and government potentially looking at this as a way to get more affordable housing to the market in the way of rentals.
Well, I mean, the federal government specifically, so they made an announcement last year in the budget around the withholding tax and changing, the withholding tax from 30 down to 15% to be able to encourage a pipeline of build to rent. And they had also identified that there was going to be a proportion of that which would have been affordable, but that was based on a discount to market rent. So National Shelter, the Community Housing Association, Industry Association and the Property Council have put forward some amendments to that legislation to tighten up the definition of affordability so that it has an income-based rent component to it, that the affordable housing component is managed by community housing providers, and that there are also I guess some better tenancy outcomes in terms of no cause evictions and longer leases. So we've crafted up those amendments and we've put them through into the inquiries and hearings, and we've been engaging with parliamentarians around those because we think that they just strengthen the legislation that's been put forward. And should that go ahead based on a prospective pipeline of 100,000 dwellings, there would be 10,000 affordable dwellings that would come out of the build to rent pipeline.
Would that be enough? Would that not even scratch the surface?
Look, I think what I would say is not just about the build to rent, but also the Housing of Australia, future fund. That what the government has done is a start to the crisis. But when we look at what we really need, it is an enormous amount of investment in social and affordable housing to be able to respond to the demand that's there at the moment.
Yeah, it's staggering, isn't it? Is there any other policy changes or initiatives that can be introduced to help bring more affordable accommodation to the market, both through community housing providers and privately?
Look, I think it's a whole range of things. So, we've got the Housing Australia Future Fund. Various state and territory governments have been also putting in, big investments into social housing, including in WA, I think in the budget last year. So that's, one particular component. Um, we definitely need, more supply, but there's a whole range of measures that are influencing that around, finance and costs of construction and workers as well, that are influencing what's being brought to the market. So, I mean, I think when we really want to be able, though, to just be responding to the demand that exists, it really is about capital funding for social and affordable housing. You know, there's no other way to get around that. That if we want to house low income households, that's what we need to do. So we've been advocating with our colleagues in terms of the Community Housing Industry Association and Homelessness Australia. So we've been collectively advocating, to parliamentarians with a view to the next election, that what we would like to see is that there is a very specific target of 10% of all dwellings are social and affordable dwellings. So it doesn't have to happen tomorrow, but that's a target that we'd like to see, that in 15 years time, that's where we're getting to. And the other thing that we'd like to see government do is quadrupling the HAF. So if we're so invested into having the HAF as a mechanism, we will get to the end of the 5 years and all the funds will be expended. Let's have a rolling scheme so that it just reinvests and it just continues into perpetuity, so that we can just have this ongoing scheme of funding social and affordable housing, rather than having what we've had for decades, which is this stop-start capital mechanism that's, at the whim of the politics of the day.
Interesting. And we've also got the over 55 single female, which is in housing stress, which is the fastest growing demographic of homelessness right across the country right now. Any policy or legislation changes in place to try and help them people into housing?
Generally, what we're doing generally in terms of social and affordable housing. But one of the things I'll give you a heads up about. So next week there is a report that's being launched by the Housing for the Aged Action Group, along with Swinburne, that we've been supporting. That's around what's called the missing middle of older people. So, as you would know, we've got a growing cohort of older women who are, retiring into poverty and homelessness. Some are eligible for social and affordable housing, so through the register. But the other thing that we're seeing, and this came across in some work that was done through Q Shelter looking at shared equity, is there's also a cohort of older people that have got some equity. So whether they've had that from a house sale, because of a divorce or a separation, or they've got, limited superannuation funds. But there's not a lot that they can do with that, because there's restrictions on, maybe what they want to be able to buy and lending practices and all of those sorts of things. So what we really want to understand is how big is that cohort, and what could be some things, some policy responses to enable them to have maybe home purchase and housing security, utilising that equity that they have. So that could be shared equity, it could be through community land trusts and, sort of more cooperative models, and, potentially some changes to the lending laws to enable, and when we talk about older people, we've got to remember that we're talking from 55, so we're not talking like old, because I would think about myself, heading into my 50s, so I don't want to be called old, but we need to sort of think, well, people at 55 that may have some equity, and they're still going to be working for another 12 years of their life.
Yeah.
So they're not retiring at 55. So because what we found that happens is that this cohort may have some equity, but they can't do a lot with it. So then they're having to use it to pay private rent and then end up in poverty and then, be able to apply for social housing. So the report that comes out next week is about sort of looking at that cohort and understanding how big it is, and proposing some policy options.
Yeah.
Because I think the more that we think about older women at the moment and what they're facing, if we don't fix our housing crisis now, that's the kind of thing that we're heading towards for a much larger proportion of, Australians retiring into poverty, with no housing security, and all of the associated issues that come with that.
Yeah. So it's a massive problem. We both know that. It's probably a problem too big just for the government to fix themselves, which brings opportunity for the private market. What style of housing are you seeing work that investors are bringing to the market right now, which is affordable and is helping people like the over 55-year-old female?
I think what we're seeing is, and I'm not going to call it niche, but I think we're seeing sort of a range of sort of innovations that are about more cooperative models, more kind of community land trust models, and that includes people being able to contribute some of their equity or capital, in a shared kind of space. And you're seeing that come up either through, I think, through developers, but also through sort of more community-led initiatives as well. So a group of people that are like, no, this is what we want to do. We do want to live together. And then they're having to navigate the system, which isn't necessarily kind to them, because they don't fit neatly into certain boxes, in terms of like the planning approvals or, lending or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think what we're seeing is a range of innovations that are coming up to respond to this need, particularly for older people, but could have some benefits sort of cascading down into different age groups.
Interesting. So being on the Gold Coast and being in Brisbane as well, you'll be aware of rooming houses over on that neck of the woods, and it's been very popular, especially in Brisbane, Queensland, particularly. Pretty good in Victoria. We're trying to crack the market here in Western Australia, but from what we can see, there's been a lot more activity on the East Coast there. What's your feelings around that in private investors bringing rooming houses to the market in the way of affordable accommodation?
Look, I think it certainly has a role. I think it certainly has a role for a cohort. I think like any sort of more innovative or specialist kinds of housing, I think it's what we need to be able to offer people is, to use from the disability space, choice and control. So, that it's an option for people if that's what they want. So it might, suit students, it might suit, just people at a particular phase in their life. And if it's a long-term option, ensuring that it's a long-term option that people are choosing. You know, particularly when you look at, say, Brisbane or in Sydney, well, in Victoria, boarding houses or lodging houses, have quite a history. And, some of that hasn't been great, as you'd know, in terms of how they've come about and the fire safety issues that have, come along with those. But we're seeing the next generation boarding houses, in places like Sydney and, and in Brisbane. So I think I think when it comes to different housing models, there is a role for it. I'm just always loath, and we see this with tiny homes where people go, we need lots of them. Not all of them are going to suit everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it really is about, well, how do you have a model that or deliver models that people like, but also to with each of those models, how can we be delivering them in a way that or have a system that is enabling rather than disabling for them, so that they can be delivered in a way that's much more sort of smooth and, say, cost effective.
I think you summed it up there. I mean, there's no one answer to this problem, is there? It's,
No.
there's tiny homes, there's rooming houses, there's built to rent, there's normal 3 bedroom, 4 bathroom
Yeah.
houses that families need. We just need more housing in general.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, but also more diverse housing, because I think, I hate to think that we're in what we're delivering, like let's say around apartments, it's just 1 to 2 bedders, in Sydney. If you're a family that wants to live in an apartment, well, your options of a 3 to 4 bedder, are fairly non-existent, for
Mm,
example. So how do we ensure that, yes, we need supply, but how do we ensure that the supply that we are getting is the right supply in terms of that diversity of dwellings and bedroom types, is well designed and well built, thinking of the stuff that's come out recently in the Productivity Commission. But the other part too around supply is also affordable, so that what we're delivering in supply isn't just all at one end of the market.
yeah,
Mm.
gotcha. So with you stepping down from the role at National Shelter, can you give us a little bit of what's next for Emma? What's the next role involved?
Yeah. So I'm heading off to the city of Logan, which is just down the road from me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be their strategic lead on homelessness. So it's a new position that's been created. Similar work to what I have done in local government before. Really excited because it's such a new space for them. But I think sort of, more broadly, is fairly indicative of what local governments across Australia are facing about what their role is in responding to homelessness. I think a lot of local governments who never thought that this would have been an issue for them are really facing, a lot of community pressure on both sides, to either respond to it or to move people on, but are really grappling with high levels of public facing homelessness that they've never seen before, and that includes both, rural and regional
Mm,
communities. So the housing crisis is, so profound. I think it is very difficult to find an area of Australia that is not grappling, with some aspect of the crisis.
absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. It's what is homelessness though? Like when people think of homelessness, they'll think about the person that's in the sleeping bag, in the shop front and stuff like that. Is that changing and people just aren't noticing it?
Well, when we sort of define homelessness, from a very sort of statistical kind of point of view, um, public facing homelessness is only one part of that. So you've also got people who are homeless, but they might be accommodated within the homelessness service system. They might be in, say, boarding houses, so because that's not particularly secure, they might be couch surfing. But the other part, and this is the probably the biggest part of homelessness, is the severe overcrowding of dwellings. So when we look at what's happening in terms of public facing homelessness, and we probably think, wow, that's a lot, and we're seeing such an increase. Statistically, the biggest homelessness cohort are those who are in severely overcrowded dwellings, and that can be because, purely around cost. So they're trying to save costs. So you might have, two or multiple families living in one dwelling, and that's not just an issue that is facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. For example, you'll see it in maybe different cultural communities in Western Sydney, but for example, here on the Gold Coast, it's still the biggest cohort of homelessness.
Mm. So
So
we,
I think, yeah. So I just think when we think about that, what we see publicly really is so small.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
The hidden homeless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And coming back to older women, for example, um, you think about the amount of older women that might be sleeping in their cars, or other families, and they may not even be visible in any other kind of public facing homelessness either, because for safety reasons, they don't want to be seen.
Mm.
Mm.
Emma, thank you so much for your time in the podcast today. It's been great catching up. We
Thank you.
wish you all the best in the next role, and we'd love to hear more about it maybe in the future.
Yep. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Join us again next week on the podcast, and we'll see you then.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you can stay up to date with all cash flow positive property updates.